Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and in my Redeemer. In our gospel reading this morning, we find a noted controversial theological passage related to Scripture. And in this section of Matthew 16, we find a statement from Jesus to Peter in which our Roman Catholic brethren will argue demonstrates Peter as the vicar of Christ and Peter's successors as follows, establishing what would often be described as the dogma of the papacy. I will engage briefly in that topic later on in this sermon, but I certainly don't want that to be our focus. What I hope to demonstrate in this sermon is that the primacy of Christ and secondarily the apostles and their successors in founding the church and the sacramental grace that follows from this. That from that, it's my hope that everyone will come to see the role that the church and the sacraments play in your everyday life. Jesus begins this section by asking his disciples what appears to be a fairly simple question. From the King James, the text reads, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And the original Greek is probably a better translation to go with the ESV, which says, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Now, the question, as translated from the ESV, doesn't clearly identify Jesus as the Son of Man, but as we'll see in his next question that he asks, he does clearly identify himself as the Son of Man. So whichever textual translation one wants to use, ultimately Jesus understands himself as the Son of Man. It's just, does he identify it with the first question and the second, or just in the second? The disciples identify several common ideas that people held regarding who Jesus was. The disciples answer by saying John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others say Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets. In one sense, these aren't crazy thoughts. There is much in the Old Testament that had first century Jews looking for Elijah or Jeremiah or other prophets to return. With the relatively recent execution of John the Baptist and the miracle scene surrounding Jesus' ministry, apparently there were some that thought that John the Baptist was going to return from the dead to bring about the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. In essence, all of these individuals would have seen in Jesus the restoration, would have seen in Jesus, the Son of Man, the restoration of Israel and the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies that would correspond with the return of Old Testament saints like Elijah, Jeremiah, and Moses. You can think of those answers as partially correct. On a test, they may have gotten, out of 10, 5 out of 10, right? They're not going to get a total perfect score, but they get a partial correct answer. The people Jesus is asking the disciples to report the views of aren't the Jewish leadership, which have totally rejected Jesus at this point. These would have been people who had seen what Jesus has done, but either aren't part of his followers, or maybe these people are part of those followers that we see end up walking away from Jesus as recorded in John 6. After hearing these incomplete answers, Jesus then asked the 12 as a whole, "But whom say ye that I am?" The 12 have obviously seen more of Jesus' ministry than the common man. Plus, they've been present to most, if not all, of his teaching, so they should be in a position to offer a more complete answer than just the average person on the street that Jesus refers to in the first question. Matthew records for us the answer of the Apostle Peter. Now, it's impossible to know if Peter is answering just for himself, this is the personal view of Peter, or is he speaking on behalf of the 12? It would seem that Peter's speaking just for himself, but it also seems that the other 12 would have supported Peter's answer, or it is certainly possible that for whatever reason, Matthew simply decided not to record the other 11's responses. Yeah, certainly a possibility. They obviously did not have recording devices to record every single thing said. But Peter's answer, whether he's speaking on behalf of the 12 or for himself only, is profound. Though, even with his profound answer, he still doesn't fully understand the ministry of Jesus. Here Peter says, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." But then just a few verses later, again, not in our gospel reading this morning, Peter rebukes Jesus for Jesus saying that he would be killed by the Jewish leaders, but then rise again. But at Peter's answer, the first one, not the rebuking of Jesus, in his statement that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus praises Peter for this. He says, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven." Jesus makes it clear here that Peter has not come to this understanding of Jesus on his own or by other normal human ways of learning. It's the Father that has revealed this to Peter. Of course, the text doesn't tell us exactly how that happened. It's possible that the Father used natural means for Peter to come to this belief about Jesus, or it could have been purely some type of supernatural revelation. In my estimation, it doesn't really matter. The point is that without the Father, Peter would not have come to affirm that Jesus is Christ, the Son of the living God. This is a very lofty, messianic, and Christological claim. Peter affirms that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah and divine. This is extremely profound compared to those common views stated earlier. Obviously, at this point, the Father has not revealed to many the full truth of who Jesus is. In this claim, he affirms that Jesus is the prophet like Moses. He is the Davidic king. He is the high priest. He is the prophet like Elijah. Of course, as I said earlier, Peter still doesn't have this full picture of Jesus' ministry. But by God's grace, he is elevated to understand something that no man can purely understand by natural means. This is why Jesus describes him as blessed. The grace received from God is what corresponds to Peter being blessed. But then Jesus goes on to further say to Peter, he says, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." I see two important phrases here in this statement. First, Jesus says that he will build his church, upon this rock. And secondly, the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. We need to understand in the first phrase, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." We do find poetic language at play here. The Greek word for Peter and the Greek word for rock are very similar. In the Greek, we have Petros, translated as Peter, and the word for rock, Petra. Very similar words. Clearly, Jesus is using some type of play on word here. However, from this poetic statement, it does seem to me to be a bit of a stretch to side with our Roman brethren that this is an affirmation by Jesus that Peter is the first pope in the full manner endorsed by Roman Catholic dogma. Now, I take no issue in the slightest in affirming that Peter is the rock that the church was to be built upon, in the sense that the Bishop of Rome is the first amongst equals. In my estimation, this makes far more sense of what we see recorded in Acts, related to the dynamics between Peter and the other apostles, and it also makes